debate in Parliament. We in the minority told the minister that the government's revenue policies were unrealistic, and they didn't listen to us. The data in the 2026 budget has, however, vindicated our stand. Total revenue and grants, as at the end of the third quarter, reported by the minister in the budget, provisionally amounted to 154.9 billion Ghana cedis. And this is against programmed amount of 162.6 billion Ghana cedis for the same period, a shortfall of 7.7 billion Ghana cedis. Similarly, domestic revenue for quarter 1 to quarter 3 was 153.9 billion Ghana cedis against programmed 160.7 billion Ghana cedis, a shortfall of 6.8 billion Ghana cedis, whilst tax revenue for the same period stood at 124.6 billion Ghana cedis against program tax revenue of 133.5 billion Ghana cedis, a significant shortfall of almost 9 billion Ghana cedis. In his budget speech, the minister lost the courage to admit for once that some of his expectations were not met. Particularly, revenue generation is one of the major components of the fiscal consolidation program the government is implementing. And for its importance, the minister should have been bold to concede that all is not well with the fiscal consolidation. This is why he had to forcefully underspend in productive sectors of the economy, a practice he now calls fiscal discipline. This year has been heavily associated with the sweeping of the accounts of various departments and agencies by the minister, including the accounts of the District Assembly's Common Fund, almost 1.4 billion Ghana cedis swept from that account, a symptom of revenue failure, a phenomenon that made many government agencies not able to function during the year. It is not a crime to accept failure when the evidence is glaring, Mr. Minister. We must also note that the 2026 revenue measures are not realistic. I hope they will listen to us this time. The government expects revenue and grants to rise to 16.8% of GDP, driven by an 18.8% increase in non-oil tax revenue. These targets rely heavily on compliance and digitalization gains that historically materialize gradually. This is not realistic. Minister, these revenue projections are not realistic. And if revenues fall in 2026, as we have seen in 2025, 3 outcomes are likely. New taxes will be introduced in the year, like we saw with the increase in petroleum taxes in mid-2025. Accumulation of arrears or cuts to capital and social programs as they did in 2025 by cutting down spending on these budgeted programs. This revenue optimism may hide significant future fiscal stress, which we need to closely monitor. The minister, members of the press, also conveniently fails to mention the disastrous auction performance throughout 2025. Market participants have delivered a devastating verdict on the administration's economic management through their systematic avoidance of government securities. Out of 45 auctions conducted this year, an unprecedented 25 have failed outright, a failure rate exceeding 55%. That reveals not just market skepticism, but active rejection of government paper. Investors are voting with their feet and their capital, demonstrating a clear preference for short-term instruments over any long-term commitments to a government they no longer trust. It has created a vicious cycle. Each failed auction forces the government to rely more heavily on expensive short-term borrowing, which in turn increases rollover risk and further undermines investor confidence. The cumulative shortfalls of 17.5 billion Ghana cedis represent not just a financing gap, but a vote of no confidence in the government's ability to manage the economy sustainably. The stock market's reaction during this budget presentation week provides additional damning evidence of this confidence crisis. This week, the GSE Composite Index fell by 0.69%. In comparison, the Financial Stocks Index dropped by 0.12%, a decline that occurred precisely when the market should have been rallying on the government's supposedly positive economic news. This timing is no coincidence. It reflects sophisticated investors' assessment that the budget promises of this government lack credibility and implementation capacity. When more than half of the auctions in a single year fail, it is not the market that is broken. It is the government's credibility that has collapsed. Banks and financial institutions, traditionally the backbone of domestic financing, are increasingly reluctant to extend credit to a government that cannot honor its commitments. This credit crunch cascades through the economy, starving productive sectors of necessary capital and perpetuating the cycle of economic stagnation. Beyond this, members of the press, the Bank of Ghana's approach to currency management reveals another dimension of the government's short-term thinking. Under the IMF program's discipline framework, foreign exchange interventions were prudently limited to a sustainable level that balanced market support with the preservation of reserves. During the MPP administration, the IMF restricted the Bank of Ghana from intervening in the forex market heavily. The intervention budget was fixed at $80 million per month, despite the international foreign reserves exceeding the IMF target. What I'm trying to say is that people have asked if it is easy to intervene, as the Bank of Ghana is intervening in the forex market, why the MPP not do that? The reality is that the IMF restricted the Bank of Ghana from intervening heavily. They asked the Bank of Ghana to intervene only with $80 million every month. $80 million every month. Ladies and gentlemen, these restrictions were removed at the end of 2024. As a result of this, the new Bank of Ghana management and the government, when they came into office, started benefiting from the work they knew nothing about. And they began to inject massive sums of forex into the market from the reserves that were accumulated by the MPP government before we left office. At the time we left office, we accumulated almost $9 billion United States dollars. But despite these reserves, the IMF requested the Bank of Ghana to put into the market only $80 million a month. Now, what is this government doing since the restrictions were removed? They have injected several billions of dollars into the market. The last time I checked, they have injected almost 8 billion United States dollars since January into the market. That with the $80 million we could only put in the market. This October and November alone, the Bank of Ghana announced they will put how much? $1.4 billion every month, isn't it? This is what they are doing. Ladies and gentlemen, despite these burdensome and costly interventions, which have reduced the cedi's value from approximately 14 Ghana cedis on 6th January 2025, when the MPP left government, to almost 11 Ghana cedis per dollar, the gains they are making from this heavy intervention are disappointingly modest and fundamentally unsustainable. With the significant billions of dollars of interventions, we expected the rate to be around 8 cedis to $1. But the market's muted response reveals a sophisticated understanding that currency strength cannot be purchased. It must be earned through sound economic fundamentals. Did it not prick your conscience when, in touting the government management of the cedi, the minister used the exchange rate for November 2024? The exchange rate for November 2024 of 16 Ghana cedis to $1 to show the unprecedented levels of appreciation in our local currency, instead of the rate of 14 cedis to the dollar on January 6, 2025. Did it not prick your conscience? Ladies and gentlemen, this propaganda management of the economy is becoming far too much at best. Merely repeating an untruth does not make it the truth. It is important to note that this futile exercise of heavy market interventions have put stress on international reserves, while the core structural weaknesses, that is, chronically low productivity, a natural forex surrender by exporters, and anemic export performance remain completely unaddressed. Instead, these resources have been squandered on a temporary cosmetic improvement that will inevitably reverse once intervention capacity is exhausted. We only wish the government held a measured long-term view. Instead, the governor appears more interested in grabbing headlines and projecting confidence in the economy that has not undergone any significant structural change under his tenure. It's surprising that this week, the Bank of Ghana came to face the reality, in spite of our earlier warning to them that the heavy interventions were not sustainable and will hurt the economy one day. The Bank of Ghana has now issued a new framework, for the first time prepared with the IMF to guide its market intervention. For the first time, the bank has admitted that the appreciation has mainly been due to market intervention. Additionally, the Bank of Ghana has conceded that the approach to its market intervention was non-transparent and unsustainable, as it could jeopardize the reserves needed as buffer against international shocks if they continued with the huge interventions they did. Whilst it promises to continue to intervene to, quote, dampen short-term volatility in the foreign exchange market, responding to disorderly conditions without undermining exchange rate flexibility, at least it wants to do it this time in a measured and transparent manner. More importantly, the bank also concedes publicly for the first time that it has been relying on the MPP's gold purchase program, introduced by the former Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, under the government of President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and is now emphatic that the gold purchase program will continue to be the anchor of its foreign exchange policy, a fact the NDC and its supporters have denied consistently. If you have not heard this yet, let me quote the Bank of Ghana from the statement it issued this week, and I quote, "The Bank of Ghana will intermediate FX flows in a market-neutral manner, using inflows from sources such as the gold purchase program or other export surrender requirements," unquote. This is what the Bank of Ghana has now admitted. Vindication, they say, is in the womb of time. But on the streets, we say, give time some time. The government has chosen the appearance of stability over genuine economic strength. We saw this reflected in the recent negotiations with organized labor, where the government claimed victory over inflation and celebrated economic stabilization. Yet, Ghanaian workers were robbed with another token increase in the base pay by 9%. That fails to restore even a fraction of their lost purchasing power. You recall that the government increased the base pay for public workers for 2025 by 10%, a figure that was below inflation. Workers were asked to make sacrifices by His Excellency the President and promised better salaries once things improved. Workers lost real income as a result of this, because if you give them 10%, which was below inflation, they actually lost real income. We were expecting that with the much touted economic achievements announced by the minister, Ghanaian workers would have been given a decent increase in the base pay for 2026 to enable them recover the real income lost this year. Sadly, they have been insulted with an even lower increase of 9%. If you compare this with what the MPP did, you will see which party is sensitive to the plight of Ghanaians, as we increase the base pay consistently, culminating in even some 30% cumulative increase in the base pay in 2024. This is notwithstanding the fact that prices of many basic goods have not moderated. Is this an admission that a year on, they have still not improved the said conditions, which will warrant workers getting decent increase in the base pay, or an admission that they have just been deceiving organized labor. Despite moderating headline inflation, prices of many essential goods and services remain stubbornly elevated, a phenomenon economists refer to as downward price stickiness. The cost of food, utilities, transportation, and basic household necessities continue to consume an even larger share of workers' salaries, and alarmingly, there is no long-term plan to address this issue by the ruling government. Ladies and gentlemen, real fiscal discipline stands in stark contrast to the government's current approach, which involves opportunistic spending cuts and accounting manipulations. Genuine fiscal responsibility requires a comprehensive framework that balances immediate stability with long-term growth imperatives. And I have some recommendations of what reforms this government should be implementing. They should implement a program that will require full and transparent execution of Parliament-approved capital budgets with quarterly reporting on project milestones and expenditure patterns. Comprehensive broadening of the revenue base through progressive taxation and formalization initiatives. We are not asking for increase in taxation. We are asking for the implementation of progressive taxation and formalizing initiatives which will reduce the dangerous dependence on volatile short-term financing. Strategic lengthening of domestic debt maturities to reduce rollover stress and create space for productive private sector credit. Establishment and protection of a minimum capital expenditure floor, explicitly linked to verified project milestones and development outcomes, and creation of transparent mechanisms for tracking and reporting on the economic impact of public investments, including job creation and revenue generation. These reforms will stabilize the economy on a genuinely sustainable growth path without maxing fundamental liquidity problems as prudent management. Members of the press, by systematically underspending the investment budget that Parliament approved for 2025, Ghana has made itself approximately $469 million poorer in 2025 alone, and permanently lost future growth capacity, creating an illusion of fiscal prudence built entirely on postponed progress and abandoned promise. The government has made a conscious choice to trade tomorrow's economic output for today's accounting optics, creating a growthless, jobless economy that has spectacularly failed to deliver on its core promises of transformation and prosperity to the people of Ghana. The current lower levels of inflation has rather imposed enormous strain on the people of Ghana because the government did not address inflation from the supply side. The demand side approach to inflation has ensured suppressed aggregate demand. The Bank of Ghana, for example, has admitted that as at August 2025, they had withdrawn 60 billion Ghana cedis from the market to control inflation. 60 billion Ghana cedis, the Bank of Ghana withdrew from the market just to control inflation. This obviously comes at a cost, whilst the withdrawal of liquidity dried up the pockets of Ghanaians. Farmers across the nation, from Techiman to Tamale, Ho, and many other parts of Ghana. If I don't call your town, forgive me. These farmers cannot sell their produce as demand has evaporated. Traders from Makola to Kejetia complain people are not buying their goods. In fact, let me remind traders across the country that this coming Christmas, if you don't sell to your expectation, know that it is because the NDC government has withdrawn 60 billion Ghana cedis from the market just to achieve a single-digit inflation and impoverish you. Ladies and gentlemen, Ghanaians out there should know that you are no more a matter of concern to this government, to this NDC government. They have forgotten about you after getting power from you. This is why their priority has shifted from you to using the recent helicopter accident involving some of our gallant citizens as cover to procure 2 jets, 4 helicopters, and 2 offshore patrol vessels. This is going to cost our country $1.2 billion. Government must come clear why the purchase of 2 executive jets is a priority at the time it is asking Ghanaian workers to sacrifice more. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, lower aggregate demand drives down economic growth and increases unemployment. The economy is therefore growing below its potential. In the second quarter of 2025, the economy grew by 6.3%. This was less than the 7% growth in the same period in 2024. This government is praising itself for stabilizing the economy, but real economic stability should engender economic growth. Why is this stability not generating growth? It's a matter the government must explain. How is it that when the economy has been stabilized, the government is projecting economic growth for 2026 at 4.8%, far lower than the 5.7% achieved in 2024, at the time the NDC people say the economy was recklessly managed? How come? Now, an economy that is recklessly managed could produce a growth of 5.7%. And an economy that is now said to be stabilized is projecting to grow at 4.8% in 2026. This is Kosciuszko growth. Ladies and gentlemen, another issue copiously covered in the 2026 budget was the minister's assertion that they had brought Ghana from a high debt distress to moderate due to the reduction in the national debt. What he did not state in the budget were the reasons for achieving this. With the completion of almost 93% of eligible debts restructured in 2024, including 20 billion of domestic debt, $13.1 billion in Eurobonds, and $5.1 billion US in bilateral creditors' debt, Ghana was already on its way to achieving sustainable debt levels. These debt restructuring successes have further been cited by all the rating agencies, Fitch, S&P, and Moody's, as the main reason for the recent upgrades. We all know that this NDC government did not undertake this restructuring work. They were all achieved under the government of President Nana Akufo-Addo. The minister has always found it difficult to not be wished away. The record is there, and the record is solid. The NDC cannot even claim credit for the legislation of the Independent Fiscal Council, as well as the law capping public debt to 45% of GDP by 2034, which have been hailed as mark of fiscal reforms. The bills on these matters were submitted to Parliament as part of the IMF program requirement before the end of 2024. But the 8th Parliament came to an end without considering them. What this government did was to resubmit the same content as amendment to the Public Financial Management Act passed by Parliament this year. The claim for credit for these reforms is not surprising to us. The NDC government is characteristic of this. The renegotiation of the power contracts and the lithium agreement followed the same pattern of repackaging what the MPP did and turn around to want to take credit for them. The difference, however, is that, ladies and gentlemen, unlike the MPP, the government of the NDC is presenting these renegotiated contracts which will not inure to the benefit of Ghanaians. Why do I say that? These renegotiated contracts they are presenting seek to shorten the people of Ghana. For example, we were to save $1.5 billion when we renegotiated the power contracts and submitted the revised contracts to Parliament late last year. They are now celebrating a savings of between $200 and $300 million for renegotiating the same contracts. Similarly, in the renegotiated lithium agreement, they have reduced the royalty rate from 10% negotiated by the previous MPP government to 5%. Hey. These are two cases of poor negotiation by the NDC government. Sadly, the loud silence of civil society, which were crying above their voices when the MPP was laying the lithium agreement in Parliament with a royalty rate of 10%, make me wonder if we still have independent voices in Ghana. Not even the attempt to win the sympathy of the Ghanaian people by painting the MPP's record of the energy sector as a failure can exonerate you. Your record on the energy sector in Ghana's history is abysmal. The term Doomsaw is your other name and owes its existence to you because of your reckless management of the energy sector. Ghanaians cannot forget so soon. The announcement by the minister that they came to meet $1.4 billion in the energy sector owed to IPPs only shows the impressive work of the previous MPP government, as we inherited $2.4 billion when we came into office. Even the $1.4 billion the government put out was the result of the many unconscionable power contracts signed by the last NDC government, which imposed take-or-pay obligations on our country, which could not be accommodated in electricity tariffs, as some of the power plants were surplus to our capacity requirement and were most of the time idle, hence the accumulated debts. Now they want Ghanaians to clap for them for potentially making savings of $200 million from the renegotiations of the same contracts, which exposed us to several billions of dollars in bills. Does it deserve our commendation for this?
Not at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, what remains a mystery for us is the insincerity of this government in the way they treat the people of Ghana. You remember the VAT reforms announced in the budget and seeking to decouple NHIS and get fund levies from VAT were first presented in the 2025 budget, and which, according to the minister, was to support businesses as it will remove distortions in budget administration and lower the rates. The question we ask is, why is this repeated in the 2026 budget? Is it simply because the government didn't mean it when they put it in the 2025 budget? When this government wants to increase taxes, it does it with meteoric speed. For example, when they wanted to increase the growth and sustainability levy on the mines, they got the bill passed in March. When they wanted to extend the import levy bill to 2028, they got the bill passed. When they wanted to increase the energy sector levy on petroleum products by 1 Ghana cedis per liter of petroleum products, they got the bill passed under certificate of urgency. So if it is about raising taxes, there is urgency in passing the bills. However, when it comes to the VAT reforms to support businesses, the minister was too busy. The minister was too busy, as he failed to submit a bill for the amendment 9 months since the minister announced the reforms. This government does not believe in its own policy, particularly when it comes to the business community. We are not surprised, because we all know their antecedents. They are not business friendly, even if they change their colors many times. They've destroyed businesses and continue to destroy businesses. The minister, again, in this 2026 budget statement, churned out what he thinks are superior fiscal outturns. We will wait for the actual fiscal outturn to determine the true fiscal position for 2025 and what methodology he will use for the treatment of arrears. The 2024 fiscal framework, which was presented by the minister in March 2025, the government prepared a shopping list of arrears, some dating back to 2022, and used it to manipulate the fiscal outturns. Events later have vindicated us when we accuse him of data manipulation. Almost 18 billion Ghana cedis of the arrears they put in the fiscal framework for 2024 could not be validated by the Auditor General. Yet this amount was part of the so-called arrears used in determining the primary balance for 2024. What a dishonest government. We are expecting the minister to use the same methodology for determining the primary balances for 2025. What is worrying is that the IMF looked on while the minister defied the methodology for deriving the primary balance negotiated in the Technical Memorandum of Understanding of the IMF. It is very sad that the IMF went to sleep. Members of the press, the state of the economy cannot be good, as the minister wants us to believe. It is indeed associated with empty pockets and vanishing customers, sophisticated investors actively avoiding government auctions, and ministries struggling to function as they have been starved of the basic resources needed to deliver services. The path forward demands more than cosmetic adjustment or rhetorical commitment. Ghana deserves genuine economic leadership rather than broken promises, real fiscal discipline rather than opportunistic austerity, and a government that delivers results rather than using. For us to move forward, we must reject the false narrative that underspending equals prudence. Proper fiscal discipline means executing approved budgets transparently and not underspending in productive sectors, but delivering precisely what was promised to the people of Ghana. In less than a year, the government policy credibility is already under threat. The 133 economy that Ghanaians were sold risks being labeled 419 if the government continues its current course. Not only the 24-hour economy, but also the promise to establish a Women Development Bank in 2025 has become another 419. Again found space in the 2026 budget, another attempt to deceive the hard-working Ghanaian women. Only through credible policies, disciplined implementation, and transparent governance can we restore the confidence necessary to unlock Ghana's tremendous potential and deliver the prosperous future our nation deserves. The 2026 budget represented a critical test for the government to match its rhetoric with action, but the government chose to present even more half-baked policy ideas packaged as transformative initiatives. As a result, we look set to endure another year of fiscal indiscipline marked as prudence, despite the economic evidence demanding a change in approach. What we need is economic transformation, which Ghanaians were promised, but what we see now is economic stagnation masquerading as progress. It is economic decline disguised as development. And the 2026 budget does not offer the hope that could take us out of this. As we conclude, we would like to state that the structure of the 2026 budget does not support the claim of a major shift towards jobs, productivity, and transformation. Investment levels remain low, revenue projections are overly optimistic, borrowing pressures are high, key fiscal risks are under discussed, flagship programs lack transparency and costing, and budget commitment. The lower GDP base and revenue shortfalls mechanically raise the debt to GDP ratio, even if the cash deficits narrow. In effect, Ghana is consolidating by shrinking the denominator of its debt ratio. True debt sustainability requires sustained growth and credible revenue mobilization, not austerity that undermines both. Also, hidden financing pressures have not been duly reflected. The government has faced several uncovered auctions this year, and this is likely to be repeated next year. The Bank of Ghana bills remain attractive because they reflect the true interest that the market finds attractive and realistic, and these compete with the government's artificially managed bills. SOE liabilities beyond cocoa and energy that are not fully quantified. Domestic debt rollover risk, given the short-term maturities of government securities, as well as climate and disaster risks, which are not integrated into the macro-fiscal framework, pose further fiscal risk. Without addressing these risks, fiscal stability could be short-lived. Policies without clear budget risks are becoming slogans rather than deliverable programs. Ghana needs a better budget that strengthens revenue realism, expands productive investment, protects fiscal credibility, and enables the private sector to lead job creation. Members of the press, we can therefore, in conclusion, describe the 2026 budget, the Galamsey budget, as growthless, jobless, and minimalist budget. It contains only cosmetic rhetorics presented by a crawling government. The people of Ghana must speak up for the government to know that the honeymoon period is over. And we thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah. Most of the stations will be running at 12 o'clock.
Is the minorities press conference as addressed. I am Mwauena Egbeta. TV3 Reality Catch-Up is next on your television.